I think it's a mistake retrying Alex Murdaugh in Colleton County. I question whether anyone in the state of South Carolina doesn't have an opinion on his guilt or innocence.
So I'm joined here with Neil Gordon, a veteran journalist and an author. And Neil, I'd like to start off by having you introduce yourself and tell me a bit about your background with Becky Hill and the Murdaugh case.
Absolutely, Fiona. Again, my name's Neil Gordon, in Augusta, Georgia. Lived here for probably 3 decades, and we're a few hours from Walterboro, South Carolina. And my wife traveled and was a trial watcher and stood in line with many other excited true crime fans to get a glimpse of what was happening. And we put together a book with Becky Hill. I was introduced to Becky from my wife, Melissa, as they organically kind of bumped into each other the morning of the trip to Moselle, in which all the courtroom officials and the jurors looked at the crime scene. And when I'm not working on books like Behind the Doors of Justice or Trial Watchers, put together a video series, docu-series and such. And then I also publish locally here the Augusta Business Daily, which is just local business news about the economy and jobs and so forth. So that's my elevator shtick.
And I want you to walk me through a bit of the book writing process of how did, if you could go into how your wife introduced you to Becky, how she came to you with this idea, what she said she wanted to write with this book. If, you can just give me all the details on that.
There were about 10 photographers in the town square, Walterboro. It was March 2023. And Melissa was on the very end. She's a photographer, and she was there to kind of capture some photos. And Becky, along with others, were going to Moselle. Becky got out of the car and noticed maybe one of the journalists, videographers, maybe taking a picture of the juror's van, and she was concerned. And Melissa was on the end, and she asked Melissa if she knew this person. And anyhow, Melissa ended up taking a selfie with Becky after they met. And Melissa then texted the photo, and they began a conversation. And Becky indicated to my wife that she was interested in writing a book. She had been thinking about it prior to the trial and during the trial. She had a title in mind. She knew what she wanted to start the book with, the first chapter, and she had kind of had an outline in her mind and had been making notes. So we met over the telephone at the beginning and really kind of hit it off. She struck me as someone with Southern hospitality and very grandmotherly and very pleasant. And we ended up agreeing to work together. And 3 weeks later, to the day of Melissa meeting Becky, we sat down at Melissa's studio in Augusta, Georgia, and we began the process of being in person, via Zoom, via the telephone, via email, of kind of going back and forth, in which I would simply ask her questions just like you're asking me, Fiona, and I would take those answers and build a draft of each chapter and send it back to her. And then she would put it more in her own voice. And so that was kind of our process, and it was very fast. We had a couple of deadlines we were trying to meet based upon situations that were coming up. Netflix was going to come out with a documentary in September. There was supposed to be a boat trial featuring Alex's son, Paul Murdaugh, and that was in mid-August. And so our goal was to be finished and be out and printed with the book by August the 1st of 2023.
And now, obviously, the Murdaugh case has been thrown back into the spotlight recently with Alex's 2023 conviction being overturned after the South Carolina Supreme Court unanimously agreed that the jury in the case was improperly influenced by Becky's actions. What was your immediate reaction to the conviction being overturned?
I expected it,
Really?
actually. Yeah, I carefully not only heard the chatter that was sort of going on with a lot of true crime podcasters and folks that have sources within the court system and South Carolina law enforcement division known as SLED. So I was piped into that, but probably more importantly, I carefully watched the body language of the justices and listened to their questions and the tone of their questions. And it was evident to me they were very concerned about Becky's conduct. They were even concerned, perhaps, a little bit about how Judge Newman and Justice Toll decided what to leave in or take out in terms of affidavits, and whether or not to allow information from juror 785, who was released from her juror duties just before the verdict. She was known as the egg lady to people in the area and nationally. And so I got the impression the direction of the questions mostly to the prosecutor, Creighton Waters, who was put in a position of having to defend why he thought Becky did not tamper and why it was not important or was important, her actions. And so I was not surprised, Fiona.
How did you feel knowing that somebody you had worked so closely with was kind of at the center of this overturning?
It's very sad. A lot of different emotions. I mean, the way everything started out was so exciting, putting the book together and our families getting to know each other and writing the book and having it, opening the box of books the first time and putting in a lot of hard work and in a short amount of time. It was so exciting. And then things just month by month started to unravel. I learned that she plagiarized a chapter of the book, and then there were allegations that she violated some ethics within the clerk of court's office. And then there were some criminal charges and other charges from SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and then we learned, other things and heard, kind of what was going on, and so it's sad. It really is really sad, and um, I, I can't imagine what she must be thinking, hearing that she's the cause. I mean, there was no doubt the way the justices wrote their ruling that she is the cause of a new trial. And luckily, we met her husband and her adult children. She has a tremendous support system because I can't imagine how she feels. I can't imagine her going to the grocery store in Walterboro, her hometown. My understanding is she is still living in the house that she's always had and is let walking distance to the very same courthouse that Alex was tried in.
We're going to dive some more in later about the plagiarism allegations and how that really just brewed into a whole storm with that book that you guys worked so hard on. But I was curious, what you think about a retrial happening in Colleton County.
I think it's a mistake retrying Alex Murdaugh in Colleton County. Um, I question whether anyone in the state of South Carolina doesn't have an opinion on his guilt or innocence. But certainly in Walterboro, with that level of scrutiny, everyone is very aware of the trial and I believe would have an opinion of it. So I don't know how they pick jurors from that area, to be honest with you. But apparently, Alan Wilson, the sitting attorney general who is running for governor in November, is pretty insistent that he wants to retry Alex Murdaugh and he wants to retry him in the very same courtroom.
Do you have any predictions for how that retrial could go?
Unless Alex shares a little bit more about what really happened that night, there are rumors that possibly uh, because he was involved with opioids and drug dealers, and there was a lot of financial implications to all of that. The rumors are perhaps someone else did this to his family, but he was aware of it and was told not to say anything. So, unless Alex shares some information if something else happened that night, unless someone is caught, unless the guns are found and there's some residue and somehow that could change things, I don't think there will be a different outcome just because of the timeline of everything and so many variables around that timeline. Him being there so close to the time, um, situations involving the cell phones and travels back and forth, and how much time he spent with his mom before discovering the bodies. There were just so many things that were not in his favor. So I do think he will be convicted again.
Since everything has unfolded, you've put out a book and a docuseries called Trial Watchers, where you dive into why people are obsessed with true crime and bringing some more context to your relationship with Becky. I'd love to kind of just hear more about, how everything went from, just starting off the book to becoming close to, I mean, one of the sentences you had said was that her actions could have cost you your career. So, I'm curious of when the allegations first came out against her, you had said it was like somebody was attacking a family member, and you said, quote, "This is not the Becky I knew." So who was Becky to you?
I think there are several sides to Becky. At her core, I believe she is uh, a graceful Southern lady with a lot of charm and nuances of sweet tea and, come spend some time over here and, you know, use the rocking chair and such. Just what you might think of Aunt B from Mayberry. Um, and I believe that's sincere. I definitely do. But also at her core, and this is not just Becky. I think there's so many people out there that they really want to please people. They really want to be liked. They really want to feel important. They really want to be part of what's going on. And sometimes when you say yes to everyone, invariably you have to say no to others, or it snowballs and creates some issues. And I think that her judgment in a lot of situations was very clouded by an overwhelming desire to make people feel comfortable and to say yes, and to be involved, to feel part of things. And so, like I say, I think there are different sides. Melissa and I also learned as time went on that we would discover different things about maybe what Becky said or what have you. And we would talk with her and we would say, "Well, how does Tommy feel about that?" And she said, "Well, I didn't tell him. He doesn't need to know," kind of thing. So it felt like there were secrets that you maybe wouldn't have. We just sort of, kind of learned that. You know, she wrote an odd email in the middle of the night to a reporter from a South Carolina publication and defending uh, the fact that she didn't involve herself in things, and her son, who was charged with a wiretapping crime, was not involved in that. And she tried to explain to this reporter what she believed happened, and just poor judgment. But she didn't. It was kind of like a secret that she did that. She didn't want her family to know.
Mhm. And Tommy is her husband, correct?
Tommy is her husband, and
Okay.
he's a solid guy, really steady as she goes, steady as he goes. I'm not sure he necessarily wanted her to do this book. He's a very cautious person, I would say, doesn't like to take a lot of risks. And I think saw this as a risk, which in hindsight, he was certainly right about that. But a very good guy. He handled Fiona, the business side of the book, in terms of working with the CPA and paying the bills and just dispersing any of the profits or the royalties that we earned.
And it kind of appears that your wife and her husband were all close. What was your guys' relationship like outside of the book writing process? Were you going out to dinners? Were you chatting off hours? Were you becoming like a close friendship?
Yes, I would say so. And we have Lindy, who's now 12 years old, and at the time I think was 9. And she came to town one time to read the audio book portion of Behind the Doors of Justice. And next thing I know, she took Lindy on the main street there in Augusta and just took her shopping.
Mm.
And so she really liked Lindy a lot. When she would stay over, Lindy would, climb in to bed with her, and they would, read a story or what have you. So it was a very close relationship. We traveled one time to Tybee Island and spent time in a condo, and there were a few book events, but we decided to just kind of stay together, cook together, and try to make it a working vacation. Um, and yes, Melissa and Becky were definitely very close, and I thought a lot of Becky as well.
What was she like outside of work? I mean, you've talked about that, like Southern charm and hospitality. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Everybody really loved her in Walterboro. She was just sort of like the town crier, or the person everybody would come to if they'd have a problem. It seemed like she was related to everyone, even though she wasn't. But she would say to me, "Oh, she's like a daughter to me." So you could see the reverence that people in Walterboro had for her, and as an example of that, they provided incredible support. I think it was called First Thursday, and this was in August of 2023. The books had just come out, and we set it up for a coffee shop there in downtown Walterboro. And I mean to tell you, there was a line outside the building wrapping around of people that wanted to come, wish Becky well, get her to sign an autograph on the book. And I want to say there were sales of about 250 books in 3 or 4 hours. It was extremely hectic, very successful, and people were really happy for Becky.
And going back to that bit that you shared about, vacationing and trying to have like a working vacation and the interaction she had with your daughter, did you kind of see Becky as almost like a sister or like an aunt to your daughter, or just like, a best friend of your wife? Like how would you name that kind of relationship?
Very interesting, because I thought about it. Um, I was raised by older parents, and so I never had a living grandmother or grandfather as my daughter has a few, and wonderful. So she was sort of grandmotherly to me, even though I'm actually older than her. I kind of looked at her in that realm, and as did my daughter, Lindy, as well. So that was, you know, kind of the relationship, I suppose.
And you had mentioned in your book that in September of 2023, when the jury tampering allegations came out, you said you were the only one to defend her. Did you regret that decision defending her?
I felt like I had to, in a way, and some of it was for selfish or survival type reasons. We had worked so hard on the book, and this came out in the docuseries. I was interviewed about that time when there was this press conference in September 2023, and those accusations came out. Becky was told by her attorneys that she could not comment, she could not say anything. And, you know, in my career, I believe if you don't say anything, it appears as though you may be guilty. And if you have nothing to hide, you just kind of either tell the truth and be specific if you can, or certainly at least say, I'm aware of these allegations, and then paint a broader brush. This is not who I am. I am speaking with counsel and will be making a statement at another time or something to that effect. And we had those conversations. I had those conversations with two of her attorneys, and they refused. And I said, well, I'm going to uh, try to be the one. I can come out and say, I don't believe these allegations are true based upon my experience and spending time with her and working on the book. And I can also defend the book. And because my name was on the book, whether I liked it or not, I was tied to Becky. And so I thought it was important to get out in front of this situation. And so I did a lot of different interviews because Becky was not allowed to speak. So I don't know if I spoke for her, but I just gave my thoughts as to what I observed about Becky at the time.
Would you have done that differently, or do you think you still would have defended her?
Based upon what I knew, I thought it was fine. I thought it was important. The book had just come out, and we had started living in a cancel culture, and I thought we would get canceled. I thought the book would not sell, and I had really high hopes for it. And so I think I would not have defended her if I believed that she did those things that she was being accused of.
And with those allegations, they had said that she had been speaking with jury members, trying maybe to get them to keep an eye on body language throughout the case. And the main allegation was that she wanted to sway their decision for a guilty verdict to secure a book deal. Do you believe that was the case?
Now, I didn't meet her till 3 weeks after, and Alex was already guilty. And so there was no reason for me to ask, did you want him to be guilty? Do you think this is going to help the book? Yada yada. And so that never came up. But I will say there was someone on the record, a good friend of hers, who is a colleague in another county as a clerk of court, and she's on the record saying Becky told her that if Alex is guilty, it will help book sales. I want to buy a lake house, be able to retire, etc. I can tell you that I experienced her sharing with me that she felt he was guilty as she was in the courtroom and listened to everything. And she also went out to the crime scene along with everyone else. And she felt that because of that as well, that he was guilty. And she made no bones about it. I mean, we put it in the book and she explained how she felt. And someone might say that there could have been a conflict of interest because she felt he was guilty. And secondly, if he was guilty, in her mind, she thought it could have affected book sales. I personally don't think it mattered. If he was innocent, there's a whole slew of more people who thought he was guilty. And so I think that would have been just as or more interesting if he was not guilty. A mistrial uh, could have meant that there'd be another trial. So I didn't get the reasoning, but in her mind, she very well may have thought that a guilty verdict could have helped book sales.
And going back to conflict of interest, did you ever have any concerns about her role in the county as the county clerk when writing this book with her?
I knew that this had not been done really before in my research. I don't think I found anything where another clerk, sitting clerk, wrote a book right after a trial. I don't recall an attorney writing a book right after the trial, attorney that's still an attorney and still works in the courtroom, a judge, certainly jurors all the time write about their experiences. So I knew this was edgy. I didn't want her to lose her job because I cared about her. I really didn't want her to lose her job. And so we all decided, mostly Becky, for her to do some research. We started on the book concurrently while Becky was speaking to attorneys in town and to a media attorney who was there in the courtroom and asked to be there by Judge Newman. So that was his area of specialty, being a media attorney. She asked him. He wrote to the Ethics Commission in Columbia, South Carolina, and she wrote as to what she wanted to write about. And so she asked about whether she'd be allowed to. And there were a few interesting things about that. One, what I learned is if Becky would have wanted to be a clerk of court in another county anywhere, she would have violated ethics rules for whatever reason. If the work that she was doing in Colleton County, she would take somewhere else, it's not allowed. So the fact that she would not have written a book as part of her duties in Colleton County, the Ethics Commission felt that that was okay. However, Becky was not really transparent with the Ethics Commission. What she wrote was partially true. There was what does my wife call it? Lying by omission. I think she lied by omission because she was not transparent that the backdrop of this book was the Murdaugh trial and how everything went and her background with the family and how how she operated this trial. And it is true what she wrote, that she was going to explain the process, how the sausage gets made within a trial. So it was true, that part of it. But as I look back on it, I wonder if she would have been completely truthful and said, I'm going to share how this trial went and my opinions on the trial and explain the different roles that everyone had in this trial and talk about the family background of Becky's family and Murdaugh's family and how they were intertwined, even going back to like the 1950s. So that was kind of interesting, and I guess spoke a little bit about her character.
Could you share a little bit about how her family and the Murdaugh family is intertwined?
In the 1950s, and I'm trying to remember the term when what is the term? Is it bootlegging when whiskey and other alcohol was sort of illegally sold?
I
Is
believe so.
what's
I
that
think
called? I forget. But apparently Alex's grandfather or great grandfather and Becky's grandfather or great grandfather were sort of in business together in the
mm,
county in the 1950s, and there are things online that uh, sort of confirm that, and he never was charged. The Mr. Murdaugh was never charged for that, but it goes back a long ways, their families, and so she had a lot of thoughts about that, and she knew him quite well, Alex, and she knew Alex's father, Randolph, quite well. And she shared with me something that, again, speaking of conflict of interest, as I look back on it, was kind of odd that she and the judge that she worked for when she was a court reporter prior to being elected clerk of court, she and the judge and the Murdaughs every so often would go to dinner.
mm.
They would just go to dinner and, you know, probably a conflict of interest. And I think there was a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours thought or intimated in that. And so I think that's sort of the way things have been done, either with the Murdaughs or in that town for decades. And Becky kind of just by osmosis became part of that ecosystem.
Obviously, the Murdaughs are a big family name in that region. Was Becky transparent at all in the book about her family ties to the family?
Yeah, we have a chapter that talks about how their families were intertwined. Um, and we had old newspaper clippings that we pulled about charges related moonshine. That's what it's called. They would make moonshine and
Mhm.
sell it. And so, yes, she very much went there.
Do you think then there was any bias of, her family ties with like wanting to write about this case and wanting to show her role in it and kind of bring more of the family name into the whole situation?
I'm not sure, but I mean, she had very specific thoughts about Alex and about um, his dad and grandfather. Um, Without saying it, I mean, she thought they were BSers, I guess. Charming, but, kind of, uh, they knew everybody and they tried to, be gregarious about remembering the first names and um, when kids in town had a graduation, they were known to help pay for it or provide a gift or what have you. And they sort of you know really tried to win over the county and the neighboring counties that they tried cases in. And many folks feel it was just a conflict of interest. And attorneys have said they really did not want to go up against the Murdaughs in those counties because it was just stacked against them.
Did you have any concerns before all the controversy about Becky's intentions with the book because of her thoughts about the Murdaugh family?
No, I really didn't at all. Um, I just, I mean, she had the name of the book picked out. She had some thoughts about how she wanted to go about it. And she really did want to let everyone know, peel back the layers on it, what really went on and how everything got processed, and whether it be discussions with the judge, talking about how they had to talk before and the trial, and sometimes they would talk while he was on a walk late at night, kind of thing. They would communicate about the next day, and um she would, she just shared even some issues that she had with the finance officer in the county because, again, Southern charm, she went over the top feeding people. The finance officer didn't think she should spend so much money and feed like everybody associated, not the gallery, but like pretty much everybody else, and blew through the budget. And so she shared with me the email that she sent to the Chief Justice. And we put that in the book, Behind the Doors of Justice. And she basically said, if I'm not doing a good job, please remove me. I'm working 12, 14, 16 hours a day. I'm doing the best that I can. And she was really stressed. I mean, it took, I mean, I could tell from talking with her and interviewing her, it just took its toll. And she just, what she wanted to share something unique. And it was, like I said, very important to her to come out as quickly as possible. Um, and not only was there the situation of Netflix coming out with a documentary and the boat trial, but she had heard, and I had heard, that there were going to be a slew of books about the trial. And so we both wanted to be first. We both wanted to have the first book out there. So I think those were the motivations, not any kind of vendetta or conflict of interest about the Murdaugh family. She just had some, you know, thoughts and judgments about the family.
I want to touch on more later about those deadline pressures because that ended up coming up when the plagiarism allegations came out. But you mentioned that she had these really jam-packed days of 12, 14, 16-hour, work days. There was it indicated with emails that came out and Zoom interviews that you had shared in your documentary that she was working with this book writing process while on the clock, working at the county clerk position. Did you know about that at the time? Did you raise any concerns about working on the book during those hours?
Yes, one of the four charges against her had to do with misconduct in office. And because of my experience being on the media side, we agreed that I would set up all the press interviews and it would come after hours, or on the weekends or before she would go to work or what have you. And then that way I would insulate her from any potential conflict of interest. Well, again, she wanted to be at the center and kind of in charge. And so she knew the Chamber of Commerce executive director, and they worked it out, and they did some kind of a Facebook live video, I believe, and it was in the summer of 2023. The book had just come out, and literally, I mean, this shows an incredible either lack of judgment or superwoman complex that she was untouchable. She did the interview in her clerk of court's office, and like it was a commercial, a promotion for the book. It had nothing to do with running the county court system or anything like that. I mean, right down to the website was listed. Here's how you order the book and so forth. And I vividly remember Tommy chastising her, and I mentioned to her, please let me handle this. And Tommy said, you cannot do anything inside the courtroom like that. Bigger picture wise, I would ask her, you know, Becky, we're talking about going away for a week and hitting all of these cities in the Southeast and trying to do speaking events and book signings and press interviews. Do you have the time that you can take off? Do you need to just take a vacation or PTO? She said, it really doesn't work that way. I don't have a boss. I guess you could say the governor of South Carolina is my boss, but I don't report to anyone, so I don't have to turn in any kind of slips. And I worked my tail off during the trial, so it's no big deal. And I thought, well, okay, maybe that is the way that she had it set up. I mean, in the regular work world, you go to somebody who you're employed by and you would say, I would like to take a week off. And so she didn't ever feel the need. And that bled over to multiple emails from her county given email to people related to the book during the day. And I'm sure we talked during the day. I do remember one of the Zoom interviews we did because of her schedule was during the day, and it was from her office. And someone had come in who worked for her, and then she introduced me to her, and we just briefly chatted. So it was no big deal for Becky to work on the book from the office of the courthouse and during work hours.
Was it a big deal to you that she did that?
No, I just figured my wife and I are storytellers. We're telling a story. She's an elected official. She knows what she's doing. I certainly didn't want to get her in trouble. That's why I asked, are you allowed to take off this time? Because I certainly didn't want her to get in trouble. But in the end, I just felt like, that's her position and she knows what she can or can't do.
And I wanted to go into next the whole plagiarism allegations. So it was learned that part of the book that you two wrote together had passages lifted from a draft of a article written by a BBC reporter. But from my understanding is that the reporter had emailed it to Becky at her county clerk email by accidentally mixing up her name with one of her editors who's also named Rebecca, correct?
That is absolutely correct, Fiona. You've done your research.
I try. Um, I'm kind of just interested of like what was going through your head when you realized that it was the first 12 pages of your book had just been plagiarized.
When I did an interview for the episode called Oh My God, Becky, I used the word fraud. I felt like the first 12 pages was fraudulent. It was a fraud.
Mm.
And I was incredibly disappointed. And I will acknowledge sometimes I can um, jump to conclusions and maybe not give someone the benefit of the doubt. So after I discovered the email with the BBC reporter and I got our book and I compared the email to the book and pretty much knew what I thought happened, I called her and I said, "What this preface seems awfully similar to what was sent to you. Am I what am I missing something here? So I tried to give her an opportunity to reflect upon it, and she came up with some lame excuses or responses. And she said, "Oh, I know her. I think she told me that it's okay that I could use her work." And and when I actually spoke to the BBC reporter to apologize on behalf of all of us that that had happened, I said, did you have discussions with Becky? Did you speak about the trial or whatever?" She said one time she was able to help get me a seat in the courthouse. That's it. So Becky was untruthful about that. She never gave permission to use her work. And then as I pressed Becky, she said, "Well, I knew that we needed more content. And I just kind of wanted to have it as a placeholder, maybe until we could add content at a later time." And so that, and I just forgot about it. I got busy. And I don't believe that at all. And she was a school teacher, by the way. And the the biggest thing that school teachers make sure is the kids don't copy somebody else's work, or the kids don't go on the internet and use somebody else's work that's not theirs. So she
Mhm.
knew better.
I kind of want to go back to that, oh my God, Becky moment. What were the moments leading up to you finding out about the plagiarism and, just your immediate action afterward? You said you checked like the book and just like skimmed through the pages to see like what the words were. Could you tell me more about that?
I believe it was Friday night that there was a email dump by Colleton County. A FOIA request, Freedom of Information, a request was made by several media outlets in South Carolina to see some of Becky's emails from her county given email address. And so one of the media outlets put out a PDF breaking the story that here is 2,200 pages of her email spanning about a year, um, prior to the trial and after the trial, right up through December. So, you know, me being nosy Neil or a reporter, I wanted to read every word. Maybe she said things about me. Maybe there were things, since there was a lot of smoke about Becky, was I going to find that there was fire? And so I meticulously read every single email, and I got about halfway done and then fell asleep on the Friday night, December 22nd. On Saturday morning, I got up very early, and my wife and I were having coffee, and I was reading through it. And on around page 1650 was that email exchange between the BBC reporter and Becky. And again, point of deception. The woman wrote Becky, said, "Please destroy it." Becky said, "I will. By the way, you write beautifully. I thought this was a wonderful article." She then forwarded the email to her personal email, from the county email to her personal email, and then forwarded it uh, to me, and then to the editors to put into the book. But I literally said, "Oh my God, Becky, what did you do? What were you thinking?" I mean, I remember just audibly blurting that out. And then my wife asked me, "What do you mean? What's going on?" And so we discussed it. And then I had a lot of thoughts through my head. We've put out something that doesn't belong to us. This is the BBC. This is a major network. Are we going to get in trouble? Am I going to be canceled in terms of being able to be trusted with any kind of reporting in the future? Um, Readers don't deserve to read something like that that's not from Becky in essence. And so I called her, I called my attorney, I believe her name is Holly. I reached the reporter, Holly, and then I called Amazon to find out, and then I looped in Becky's husband, Tommy, who helped run the business, and we got the book unpublished by Amazon. We explained what happened, and they agreed to not offer it from that point on, not print the books any further. The problem was there were still 1,000 or 1,500 books that they had already printed because they saw that it was selling well. And so they ended up selling those books. And then Melissa and I talked and we decided to take the royalties from just those books because we were only aware then. And we gave the money to charity. It was almost $3,000. And there were some causes in the low country of South Carolina that we learned about. And so we donated our share of the proceeds at that point. And I think this is important because it really was the beginning of the end of the relationship with Becky when I learned about this, is I made a concerted effort to distance myself from her. I contacted one newspaper person and one television person that were sort of regional or national, and I explained what happened, did an interview and explained exactly what happened. They did a story, and then Becky issued an apology for what happened.
So you had mentioned in your book that one of the first odd signs you had noticed about this chapter that ended up being plagiarized was that it had been sent over as a PDF through Google Drive when all of her other chapters were written in Microsoft Word. Was there anything else off that you noticed about this section?
I would have never thought she would have plagiarized someone's work. So it never even came into my mind. I just thought it was really good writing. I was excited that it was really good. And it was so good that the editor read it and said, "This is different from the rest of the book. This is not really in Becky's voice, but it's really well done. I think we should start the book this way to sort of lay out the facts, if you will, of the case, and then have Becky's first person account of the trial."
I was going to bring that up if you had mentioned that, there was a different voice in there. And then even there was a bit of one of the subjects interviewed, I believe, was an old colleague of yours. And you had mentioned that to her, and she said she would have to, Google him just, to find out more. Did that raise any alarm bells at the time?
I guess I don't remember that part of the Google. I'm sure if I said it, that was it. I just I felt like she brushed it off, maybe. Like she didn't really say, "Oh yeah, she didn't lie. She didn't say, "Oh, Randy was a great interview." I was more like saying, "Here's how I know him. I'm so glad you talked to him," kind of thing. Again, lying by omission. She didn't come clean, at that point.
Mhm.
And if she would have, we could have mitigated it and just took it out of the book.
And you had learned about this plagiarism after, I believe, 14,000 copies of the book was sold, right?
Yeah, a little more than 14,000 copies in, I guess, from August through December.
And you were kind of shocked, it sounded like, in Trial Watchers that, all these people read through the book and didn't pick up on pick up upon it sooner. But you had said, we trusted her and especially if like we all admired her Southern charm. And you had kind of touched on it earlier. If you think deep down that really is her, but it's, do you think at any bit, like, was there any trust broken at all through this process before you had learned? Was there any, concerns of how she was acting with writing the book?
She was just really slow at times to respond and to, polish up the different chapters.
Mhm.
So that was a little bit odd. I felt like I was always having to kind of pester her to get things done. And I wonder if she was sort of delaying and maybe was concerned about wanting to complete the book, but not wanting to disappoint me.
Mhm.
Again, her husband was probably saying to her, just don't, just stop, don't do the book kind of thing. Um, so I'm not really sure. It's very hard to peek into her mind as to what she's thinking. The only thing I know is she just exercised really bad judgment. Why she did it is sort of up for discussion.
And once her attorneys did put out a statement about the plagiarism allegations, they cited deadline pressure. Can you tell me a little bit more about that pressure? I mean, you mentioned that there was a Netflix documentary coming out, and I believe in either the book or the docuseries you put out that, she wanted the book and that Netflix documentary to kind of go hand in hand and come out almost at the same time.
We used a clip in the docuseries, and she it was on a Zoom call, and she was interviewed by Netflix, and she was told that the docuseries was going to come out. I think it maybe was September. It was supposed to come out, and so that's why she said to me, "I think we should try to come out before that, maybe in August."
Mhm.
And I, just hearkening back, to news, the publicity from the boat trial was going to be off the charts if
Mhm.
that were to happen. It never did. It got settled, but we were planning for there to be a trial and to have the books ready before then.
And once these allegations came out about the plagiarism, you were quick to wanting to put out a statement, right? Because your name is also on this book alongside hers. And I had read that, you kind of gave her a notice before, I believe it was on the morning that the story was supposed to break when you spoke with a reporter and put out a press release. Why did you give her that heads up before you came out with your comments?
I think that might have been my way of trying to encourage her to take responsibility for what she did, and that it would be better to be transparent than, again, stay silent like she did when there were allegations, ethics violations and other allegations.
And you had wrote about how the words in your press releases and TV appearances were carefully chosen. I wanted to just, read a short excerpt of that. You had said the press release had carefully chosen words such as blindsided, and in my TV appearance, I used words such as shocked, disappointed, and sad. I said I was sick to my stomach. I took the high road and didn't pile on Becky. I decided to simply express my feelings and not judge her actions. When I thought about it later and discussed it with my wife, my emotions went from being hurt to feeling angry. Becky's irresponsible actions could have cost me my career. Do you think there's something you would have liked to have said instead of those words? Or did that
No,
wrap it all up?
I think it did. Yeah, I think that summarized, you know, what I was thinking and how I wanted to distance myself. And then I think there are different stages, when you kind of get hurt or um, angry or disappointed or frustrated. I think there's different levels of grief.
Was it after these like plagiarism allegations came out that you and your family distanced yourselves from her and her husband?
I think I may have had one more conversation with her. I was on a program. Dr. Phil did a program on the trial, and Jim Griffin was on, Alex's attorney, and one other attorney who does a podcast with him. And I was on, and I think I called her prior to that, um, to let her know, I was going to be on, and these are some of the questions that they were asking of me. And I think I wanted her to update something, and I can't recall exactly what it is, or what it was rather, but I think I did have, that may have been the last conversation, and that would have been after the plagiarism.
Did you give these notices to her out of respect to her?
I think so. I mean, I think particularly the part about the plagiarism, because I was very transparent with her, because she didn't want me to call the BBC.
Mhm.
She didn't, she just said, let's take it out, and then let's move on. And I said, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. There's 14,000 copies out there.
And we've obviously talked a lot about your wife, Melissa, who was the book's photographer. She had been impacted by all of this as well. I had read in part of your book that, she was accused of getting special treatment with the courtroom, especially with her relationship with Becky, of like, they had met there. How did all of this impact her?
Well, she was really upset because there's a news organization that tried to say that she got special favors there in South Carolina, and it got picked up by a lawyer. We call her TikTok Lori. It's a lawyer with the first name of Lori, and she would go on TikTok and just share her thoughts on different cases. And so she took that information as fact from the news outlet, and shared that. And so we were really upset because literally she met Becky for 10 minutes before Becky went to Moselle, and then took a selfie, and then never talked to her again. It was the end of the trial. I mean, pretty much. I think the next day was may have been the jury deliberation, or the day after.
And you said the two of them had become very close during the book writing process. Was it hard for her once your guys' relationship started to dwindle after the plagiarism?
Yeah, I think so. And I, I wanted to add one thing to the last point. The accusation was that Melissa was given preferential treatment by being allowed to get in front of the line and come in and sit, to take pictures inside the courthouse or what have you. Well, no one was allowed. There was a pool camera. No one was allowed in that realm, but that
Mhm.
just wasn't true. So, and here's another thing that we had to kind of refute, or deal with. Um, so, but I think though, after the plagiarism, and learning more about the way Becky handled things and swept things under the rug and was kind of deceptive and half truths. Melissa, my wife is kind of a black and white person, and I'm more shades of gray, which is why I can kind of give Becky some grace, or uh, let her know what's coming or what have you. She pretty much was, I'm done, no more.
I wanted to wrap up here by asking, do you still have any contact with Becky or her husband?
No contact whatsoever. I think I might have gotten a tax return several months ago from Tommy, but no contact at all.
Do you think you'll ever speak to them again?
Sure, I believe in giving people grace. I mean, we all make mistakes, no question about it. It just hadn't been the right time. I think she's been in so much legal trouble and police trouble and all of that. And so maybe when the dust settles a bit, probably after the trial, the retrial, maybe we'll try to make amends.
So you would say you're open to making amends?
Sure.